All right, today is February 26th in California at least, and we've got a few things to go through on the agenda. Actually, it's fairly full by Gateway standards, so we'll see how we do today. But some of these things are look much larger than they are, so don't hesitate to add things to this agenda if you have anything you want to discuss. Also, a friendly reminder, this is a Kubernetes community meeting. That means we abide by a Kubernetes code of conduct, and that just means please be nice to each other and respectful. And one way to be respectful is to use Zoom's raise hand feature just so we can make sure we get to everybody who wants to speak. Yeah. With that, sometimes we also give a short opportunity if there are any new people on the call, if they want to give an introduction. By all means, you're welcome to give a quick introduction, say what brings you here, what your interests are, etc. But no pressure if you don't want to. All right, cool. Well, welcome either way. And with that, let's get
Well,
started. I think Nick, you've, or sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, I'm up first, but I was also just about to remind everybody to please drop your name into the attendees list as well.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so the GEP 713 split PR is open. It's pretty big. That's why it's taking me a while. Um, yeah. On the plus side, GEP 713 is now no longer 16,000 words. It's about half of that.
sweet.
Yeah.
So 713 includes everything but direct policy attachment now, and a new
No.
gap covers direct policy.
So no, there are new GEPs covering direct policy attachment and inherited policy attachment.
Oh,
And so
okay.
713 is now sort of talking about the general concept of policy attachment. Um, the inherited policy one has all of the stuff about inherited policy, the diagrams, the here's how defaults and overrides work, a bunch of other stuff. Um, and yes, Grant, that is a good example of something that I missed because I spent so long so long staring at these things. Yeah, I'll fix that today. Thanks.
Cool.
Yeah.
This
But
is awesome. Yeah, I knew this was going to be a big one, but wow, I'll need to spend some time
yeah, so
looking through this.
to summarize the changes though, there aren't actually that many. Um, I've split up the things. I've tried to make the gaps make sense by themselves. So I've added a bunch of text and sort of rewritten some stuff. The biggest changes are that I've tightened up like what makes a policy a direct or inherited policy a little bit. Because one of the things I'd noticed is that we had started having people who were making policies that basically were inherited policies in that they had you applied them at a gateway and they applied to routes and they changed functionality on routes, but because they didn't have defaults or override stanzas by the old rules, they were not inherited policy. So I've changed the rules a little bit that if you attach something to a resource and you affect things that are not only that resource, then it's an inherited policy. So that's the so if the effect of a policy flows across more than the resource that it targets, then it's an inherited policy. The idea is to keep the scope of direct attach policy quite small because it is, I think, relatively close to movable out of experimental as long as the scope is small. As long as we all clearly understand what the thing means and that the scope is small and the rules around status and stuff like that, then I think it is movable, but it needs to be kept tightly scoped.
Yeah, so I agree with that idea that this feels awfully close. Boy, is it going to be tough to determine if a policy has knock-on effects that affect other things in the tree.
I mean, yeah,
Uh,
it kind of comes down to the designers, right? Like that it's best if you're setting defaults, put a default stanza in. But the idea of
Yeah.
this is like to say like you don't have to do that, right? Like you can have an object called, you know, default policies, like default settings policy, right?
Hmm.
Like that clearly says it's a default, right? Like so you know that it has to be an inheritance policy, right? Like and there's no point then having a defaults part stanza in your spec because you're saying up front, I'm only setting defaults for this, I'm not using overrides. And so that's why and also I've seen things, where people want to attach something to a gateway that changes settings on routes, but they're like, oh, because it only attaches to the gateway and there's no defaults or overrides, then it's a direct attach policy. I'm like,
Yeah.
no. Yeah, like in that case, because you're setting settings on routes, like it needs to be, it's an inherited policy because you're affecting other things. The real rule that I think we need to use is what things do you need to look at to understand what this policy is affecting? Like if you can look at just the policy and the object that it's targeting, then it's a direct attach policy. Otherwise, it's an inherited policy.
That's fair.
Many policies are going to end up being basically inherited policy is the default state unless you meet a set of criteria. Um,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, and that's the idea behind that is to make sure that when you're using a directed policy, it's very tightly scoped again.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think this probably will be most relevant for the folks in Quadrant who are pushing pretty
Mhm.
hard on using policy, which is awesome, and I really appreciate it. Um, so yeah, but I think the idea here is to sort of keep it so that we want to do this in as smaller chunks as we can, and the smallest chunk we can do is direct attach policy.
It sounds like the direction that we're invariably headed here is very useful, but it could really benefit from reviews from people that have actually written policies or implemented policies. And obviously GK we use policy. I know there are others out there like Quadrant is a big user of policy. Anyone else who's either using or considering policy, please help us out with the review of
Yeah,
this
I'd really
PR.
appreciate that.
And don't be overwhelmed by feeling like you need to cover it all in one go.
No,
Sometimes I find it helpful just to take a chunk and say, I'm going to review as far as I can get in half an hour or whatever and call it good.
yep,
So yeah, just whatever you can do would be really, really beneficial. I know there is a non-trivial amount of get PRs right now that are waiting on review from myself or Nick or others. So I will definitely try and get to this one. But for others that are, you know, other reviews help basically. Like if you see that I haven't gotten to a get for example, your review or somebody else's review helping is incredibly helpful. So you're not the first reviewer getting to any one thing, right? It helps speed up the entire process. So encourage anyone and everyone that has cycles to spend a bit of time reviewing these and this one in particular.
yep.
Yeah.
Actually, looking at the screen you have at the moment, Rob, one thing that I should note is that I did promote, I guess is the word, a little bit, some stuff that was a little bit less prominent in these individual gaps. There's two sort of standard requirements now for every policy object. One, that you put the label. That was a requirement before, but it was not very clear. The standard label on CRD objects that's at the bottom of the screen there. That was part of the spec before, but it was easy to miss. So I tried to promote that a bit more. And and then we say, hey, for policy objects, you've got to have a spec and a status, and your status, must have conditions. And so that you can add conditions to describe what's going on with your thing. And yeah, consider if the policy is for more than one implementation, then you should namespace it with a controller name, as in route status. And then stuff like, you should have you need to have an accepted condition on your policy and some other things like that. That's in both of the things now, as musts. If you're not doing it already, that's fine, right? This is a pattern, not an API design, right? I can't make you do things. The intention here is to make sure that that is to sort of make it clear that we all agree that those are things you got to do, right? Like just do them. Don't try to be smart on these ones because like there's too many hidden mines already around policy attachment. Don't spend your
Yeah,
tokens on the status.
yeah, like what you said is completely correct. We can't force anybody to use policy attachment. We can't force anybody to use this model. We can encourage, and that's what we're trying to do. If we have enough vendors and enough different implementations that buy into this pattern, then tools like Gateway Cuddle, tools like I'm sure there's going to be UIs around this in the future, will be so much easier to build if you have a generic path for this is how you extend Gateway API, and any tool or library out there can easily show you the effective configuration at any one level. And that's the goal we're trying to work towards. We hope that things like Gateway Cuddle are good incentive to follow a consistent pattern here instead of chart your own course. But yeah, that's definitely the goal here.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
All
So
right. Well, that is an amazing update. Thank you, Nick. I will get to that at some point this week. Um, oh yeah, and like Michael said, yes, more gateway API policies built in, like backend TLS policy, is also another way to strongly encourage these patterns.
yeah.
Um,
Yes,
so
I definitely
yeah.
had backend TLS policy in mind a lot in the direct attach policy get because it is currently the main extant example of how you do a how you do a direct attach policy.
Yep.
Yeah, that's probably enough time about policy attachment.
Keith, I don't know if I see you on the call or not.
I'm here.
Oh, cool. All right.
Yeah.
I think you're next.
Sure. Appreciate it. So wanted to bring this up to the main gateway API meeting. We discussed this in the Gamma meeting last week, but just sort of doing a quick recap. Gamma has been, or the mesh support in gateway API has been experimental for, I believe, 8 months now, since last July. And we've got conformance tests and 3 implementations going. And we've been doing a lot of discussion among Gateway API leads and as well as mesh leads around the pattern and handling thinking through some of the feedback from SIG Network reviewers. And so I wanted to kind of see how folks feel about promoting the Gamma Pattern 2 standard, with the understanding that this wouldn't be the end of mesh work in Gateway API, but rather codification of mesh being a first class usage of Gateway API in the standard kind of channel. And so I may be mixing some terms there. I apologize, but yeah, I wanted to bring this up and see what folks thought and see if there's any work outstanding to be done for that promotion.
Yeah, I thank you. Thank you for raising this. I think that Gamma, it feels an awful lot like policy attachment here. I don't mean that in a bad or good way. It's just, it's a pattern, right? It is a pattern that Gateway API cannot prevent any mesh from using. It can exist with or without the blessing of Gateway API, SIG Network, whatever. It's out there. Um, it's a little different than like a new API field where we can kind of control its release, its availability, etc. So that's a long way of saying that I don't know that we have any practical means to slow down the momentum that already exists here. And I'm not saying we should. I think that this is just one of those things that if we didn't graduate it, we would end up with this thing that many vendors are considering stable, treating as stable, even though we're not calling it stable, kind of thing, right? So that's the risk on that side. On the other side, I know very, very well that the last time that we brought this up among, the broader group of SIG Network API reviewers, there were concerns about this model, right? That it was, you know, the duality of service, right? That it's serving as a front end and as a back end, and that you can have this really weird UX where you have a route that has a parent ref to a service and the same the same service is used as a back end ref potentially feels real funny. Um, I'm not saying there's a good solution to that. I know one of the requests was, to do some due diligence on what it looks like to have gateways as parents in a mesh world. I feel like that's going to be one of the things that we're going to get more questions about when we raise this back to SIG Network reviewers again, which I think is very much a useful thing. I feel like since that was one of their big points of pushback, we should have a good answer for it. The answer could be this doesn't work, or this might work, but it will take X amount of months or years to get it to work. I'm not sure, right? But those would be my thoughts. And then maybe one other concern here is that Gamma, as it stands today, feels like it doesn't have, there's not a lot to it, right? Like I don't want to downplay there's a lot of conformance tests. There's been a lot of thought that went into it, but the new capabilities, the new whatever, like it's not adding a lot of like net new, I don't know, right? And so just trying to, I think another thing that we need to define as part of this is what is our end goal? What does the scope look like at the end? Like, is this just the MVP and we're trying to solve all these other problems too? Or is this, which it sounds like from what you said, that's the case, but like just having a better picture of the scope that we're working towards, the next things that we're trying to tackle, the approximate timeline, roadmap, etc., I think would also help make a case for this. But with all that said, I'd go back to where I started with this, and that just kind of by default, it feels like it's on a path to stability, and it could get to a point if we're not careful where the API moniker that we use to describe it falls behind the reality of how the API is being used. Yeah. And with that, I think, Costin, you've got a hand.
Yeah, I echo what you said a bit, but with slightly different words. There are various concerns about some of the semantics in Gamma. That doesn't mean we should not move forward or we should do something different, but it is to make it V1, it's probably very useful to, how does it work in multi-cluster? How does it work with other implementation except sidecar based, which is what Istio is doing? Can it be implemented with shared infrastructure or with multi-tenant load balancers? There are all kind of and with I think only two implementations so far. I mean Istio and Linkerd. I don't know if there are other implementations, and I don't know if the semantics in context with multi-cluster, because that's also part of Gamma. I mean having service import as parent. Also Kuma, sorry. So I'm not entirely sure how to express it, but I think while V1 for parent ref equals service, it's probably non-controversial. It's very simple. The details matter a lot, and they are not very well defined, I believe, in some cases. So it may be worth starting small and clarifying those things with different implementations and making sure it is possible to implement it in different other ways. That was my point.
Yeah, I think those are all great points by both of you. I want to kind of go back to one of the things Rob originally said and work through all the way down to Costin. I'll see if I can keep my head on straight while doing so. I think that the thing with Gamma is that it's currently listed as experimental in the documentation, and that part of the reason I'm bringing this up and some other motivations to provide clarity to users and to implementations even as to the stability of the pattern. Because for as long as something is experimental, it can be removed, deprecated, condemned as a pattern, etc. So I think that it is, I think making some sort of move, even if it were just to say, similar what we did with policy attachment, where it was grandfathered in before certain, and it's kind of permanently. I don't know if it's experimental. I forget what the status of that GEP was, but there is some clarification where it's like kind of grandfathered in, and there's no, going to keep it baking for a bit longer. I think some more clarification as to its status would be helpful, since we are closing on that 8-month mark, and implementations and users alike can get some clarity on where that pattern is. So that's one thing. The other thing is, Rob, to your point about SIG Network reviewers, we had there's a group of us who had a meeting for a bit, just talking what the alternatives look like. I think it was right before like the holidays in 2023, where we kind of, I think, came to, I need to find that doc. I think Shane had the meeting notes for that one, but I think what I remember, the consensus was essentially that service has to be a part of any mesh API today when it comes to binding. Either service or simply the cluster IP of service must be a part of any API for mesh today. There are some other pieces, like Costin, I believe, referenced some, things about multi-cluster and such. I think there's a GEP out there about multi-cluster and Gamma. But ultimately, the conclusion we came to is like, well, we're not, and I think we actually did, I remember now, we updated the language of the Gamma GEP, or the service binding, to be specific, the service binding GEP, to make that clear that we're not prescriptively saying only service. We're saying service is the current, there's a set of potential things that the routes combine to in a mesh context, and services the primary one. Just on a pure informational note, when it comes to using gateway, like binding to gateway in the mesh context, Istio Ambient is currently looking at that exact model, in having services bind to gateways, and it's non-trivial. You've got to figure out a lot of things in order to get that to work appropriately, and then any propagation, for one, being the major one. So I think that as far as I answer to SIGNet reviewers, that would probably be, my answer is that this is non-trivial, and on the Istio side, we are interested in using that pattern, and we will be happy to share our learnings there and potentially make it a longer, a more generic API if other implementations are willing to support it. But all that said, I think when it comes to the service binding aspect of Gamma, I just go back to the earlier point of, even if it's not graduation, it's a semantic, and I think that giving users and implementations more clarity here would be really helpful. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, the big +1 on everything you said. I think we're overdue to provide some clarity, so we don't have gaps just sitting and with unclear stability. So I agree with everything you said there, and I'll defer to Nick before I say any more.
Yeah, I think it's fine that that everyone who's involved in Gamma agrees that the service has to be part of any mesh API, but practically what that means moving forward is service that yes is forever, right? Like if that is what we move forward with, then service must and will always be one of the methods that you service binding will always be there. Even if you make something better available later, then it'll always be there. You can't go back on that. In the same way that ingress will always be there, no matter how good Gateway API is, ingress will always be there. It just means that there'll be another thing for everybody to support. Do I think that that's a problem? Probably not. Maybe not. But we need to be very clear that that's what we're saying here, right? Like service binding must and will always be there, and we accept that even with the sort of all the issues that we have discussed, about service binding, that we're still going to do it anyway. Again, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but we need to be very upfront and say, yes, we understand that this is where it's at. We may build something better in the future, but when we do, we'll still have to do service binding. Like you can't take that back. And so I guess that's all I'm saying is if we're going to do that, then we should walk into it eyes wide open. This is what we are buying into. I think that there's definitely been some stuff that that Tim, for example, was talking about with wanting to split up some of the parts of service, which effectively would give you a front end and a back ends. That would be really helpful, but do I think that it's worth holding up moving Gamma forward to wait for that stuff? Probably not. But the point that I'm trying to make is like part of, I think, any graduation criteria for Gamma should be writing down, here are all the things that we talked about. We know that there are these problems. We accept that there are these problems, and we're going to do it anyway, right? Like, so that for future us, so that the next time someone's like, but why are you using service? That's a terrible idea. You can be like, go back, read the documentation. We all know that there's many trade-offs here, and we have accepted the fact that the fact of those trade-offs. That's, again, just someone who has spent a while writing down standard things now. And the more you do that, the better off you will be. The next time that someone's like, but why are you doing something so foolish? You can say, well, we completely understand the risks here. We've been very clear about it. Please read this document. And that's the main thing I wanted to say there. Like, in terms for me, right? Like I know I am really sad that I haven't been able to make Cilium's service mesh support do Gamma yet, but it is definitely on my list. And as soon as I can stop having to deal with stuff that people complain about, then then I would love to be able to actually build it. So yeah, that's enough talking for me.
Yeah, no, I the yes is forever is all too real. Once it goes in, it is, it is in, and I know there are very real concerns about that. Yeah, so but like you said, also I think the idea that we can't hold this forever. Realistically, people will use what's defined or define their own thing or just consider it, standard already, right? None of those
the
are great.
comparison to policy attachment is fair.
Yeah.
Like it's people are already using it, right? Like there's an extent we can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah,
but we should go to the others.
Completely agree. So, I just briefly, I did want to say that if what I would recommend here is working on a resolution to some of these questions that are open and have been kind of burning for a bit. I tried to write the ones I'm thinking of. If others have questions that feel significant, feel free to add them here. I think many of these have been mentioned already. I feel like working towards resolution on those and then working towards a presentation that we make at SIGNet and ideally share a doc, slides, whatever before of what our intent is for Gamma. If we get internal consensus among the group here of what we want to do, then I think we just need to work on that and build some kind of statement, doc, something that this is what we intend to do and get feedback on that. And so basically build that story of how we're taking this to standard or GA and then what we plan to do afterwards. And then work on getting feedback from there. But with that, I think Costin, you're up next.
Just a quick comment. Another thing that we could probably do is to narrow the scope very clearly, to be super clear. What are the use cases where Gamma makes sense? Like if you are in a single cluster mode, because cluster.local and cluster IP are also defined in a single cluster, then it's okay to use service and perhaps as it is today, which is cluster IP only, because that's really the only definition that is clear. And if you go to multiple clusters or multiple environments or other use cases in mesh, you should use service import, service export, gateway, plus internal load balancer, or some other mechanism that has clear semantics across outside of a cluster. Because I think many of the concerns here are also related to the environment. I mean, what is cluster local when you are outside of the cluster? What is a cluster IP if you have, more complicated scenarios? And that will create most problems for people who attempt to kind of expand Gamma too much.
Yeah, that makes sense. Candace, you're up next.
Yes, I just added one bullet point, if we don't already have it, a listing of implementations and Gamma features that they might cover. That would be wishful, but
No, good idea. I think we do have them covered on the implementations page, but I don't think we have a clear list anywhere of the feature set that is unique to Gamma, or like we have conformance tests, but we're not displaying the results of those conformance tests anywhere. And I also don't know if we've clearly defined what's extended versus core when it comes to mesh, but we probably have, and I just missed it.
yeah. And then the other question, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
You want to go, Nick?
I was just gonna say that that's the part of the point of the conformance profiles and the point of having it sort of changing a bunch of the stuff about the conformance profiles discussions that hopefully we're going to talk about in a few minutes.
Okay, so I would take out the features thingy. Just
No, you should leave it there because like we should have a list of features and it should be delivered using the conformance profiles is what I was trying to say.
Oh, okay. I thought you were trying to say we already have it. Okay.
No, we don't have it.
So
but we should use
there's work.
Do it.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay, sorry. There's work in progress on this, but it should absolutely be something that we consider a I don't want to say blocker, but something like that should be addressed as part of this conversation.
Okay. So the other question I had was with MCS. I haven't looked into MCS that much, but I wonder why does it have to be isolated? The question around MCS have to be isolated to Gamma. Shouldn't it be something that we also look at independently? Why does it have to be isolated to Gamma in terms of the broader questions?
Yeah, you're completely right. So I wrote the memorandum get before memorandum gets existed, basically, I guess, of how we want to expect Gateway and MCS to interact. And by and large, for the Ingress story, I think it was fairly non-controversial. Where it started to get really messy is when we got into the mesh and Gamma interaction. The reason it's fairly non-controversial for Ingress is there just aren't that many people that are doing that, and the ones that are generally following the pattern that MCS recommends. The thing with mesh is that most mesh vendors have a multi-cluster solution, and that multi-cluster solution is different than Kubernetes multi-cluster services. For example, multi-cluster services require you to explicitly export and, well, yeah, export services that you want to be available in other clusters. There's not the same kind of requirement in many mesh instances. So there's more of a disconnect here, and trying to find some kind of common ground is particularly challenging when it comes to mesh implementations. Because I think many of the mesh approaches to multi-cluster existed before multi-cluster service, but I could be wrong on that.
Williams definitely.
Costin, go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sorry to clarify. When I said my concern was about service itself. I mean, using service to represent workloads in multiple clusters. And as Rob said, the problem is that Istio has one interpretation of what cluster of local mean. Kubernetes has a very different implementation, and there is a lot of confusion, and some applications break if you use Istio implementation. For MCS, you need to create explicitly service export, and it's user who's controlling what is visible in multiple clusters. So this kind of disconnect between implementations, because in Istio implementation today, services still means the entire set of clusters. So that part needs to be clarified at least.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, I know we have I thought we were going to be yeah, I know we've gone through a lot of time here, so we should keep moving, but this has been excellent discussion. Thank you for raising it, Keith. Hopefully we have clear AIs out of this. I'm happy to help write up anything, review anything, and build some internal consensus before we try and push it broader to SIG Network API reviewers. But I do think that should be our main goal here out of this. As a result of once we have these questions answered. But with that, I think we're on to your next question, Keith, about potentially merging meetings.
Yeah, hopefully this is a bit less controversial. But Gamma has been having separate meetings for a while now. And as we have looked at expanding, to your questions, people's questions about features and things like that, as we've been looking at more of how Gateway API is being used for mesh use cases and things like that, really everybody's desire is to make things a standard Gateway API as we possibly can. Where there might be some shared stuff across implementation, a single proxy implementation like Envoy, for example. There's maybe desire to collaborate there, but by and large, most people who are in the Gamma meetings are also come to Gateway API meetings. And I don't know about y'all, but any excuse to get meetings off of my calendar is something that I try to explore. So wanted to see how folks feel about this. There are some things that are somewhat Gateway API, somewhat mesh specific, but even then, like all the ones I can think of, like workload addressing, mesh to ingress, propagation and how that all works out, authorization policy, all of those things still have a lot of relevance for upstream Gateway API. And quite frankly, I think that it actually does both efforts better for Gamma to become Gateway API, and for Gateway API to just have a mesh arm, have like mesh functionality associated with it. Gamma is a cool code name, but ultimately I think what users have come to appreciate about the specification is that it's a unified standard. And I think, not to go and change documentation or anything like that, but just from a procedural logistics standpoint, I think it might benefit everybody to make this just one set of meetings. And especially with the time zones being changed now in Gateway API, they're switching and alternating, which was not the case when we first started the Gamma meetings. I think that it's a good time to at least broach the conversation. So, what does everybody think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's pretty reasonable to consider that at this point. Uh, my biggest concern is that if we're not careful, we'll lose any momentum on Gamma, that it may just kind of get lost under the umbrella of Gateway. So as long as we have some ways to mitigate that, maybe that's, one-off mesh focus meetings as needed. Maybe that is that we have scheduled meetings that, once a month or something, or I don't know what, this meeting becomes more mesh themed and, a Gamma lead runs it. I don't know, whatever. But as long as we make sure that we have a path to avoiding, losing momentum on mesh, I think that I'm always on board with less meetings. So yeah, I think it's a good time to talk about it. I'll take everyone else's lack of comment as agreement. Uh, if you have any concerns, don't hesitate to speak up. Cool. All right. I'm also seeing Arco agreeing in chat. So cool. All right. With that, I've got a huge wall of text that is really just my attempt at making incremental changes to note what's changed since our last meeting. So again, we're awfully focused on 1.1. I would really love to get an RC out before KubeCon, which is like 3 weeks away. So real soon. I don't know if we're going to manage that, but I really would like to get these last pieces in. And we actually are closer than many might think on really all of these. I was talking with Richard earlier today. It seems like he's working on another update to this gRPC route conformance test PR. The biggest thing that we're missing right now is we need some other implementations to come by and just confirm, hey, yeah, I'm passing these tests, and that's it, right? That's all that we really need. We have the docs, we have conformance tests, basically, and so we just need implementations to actually say they're passing them. And if we can get this one through, then we've created a slot for one of the experimental GEPs that we're targeting. Then next up, the one that is especially close is the parent ref port GEP, and that one, we got another implementation confirming that they're passing the test. So we just need one more implementation. So if you've got an implementation that supports parent ref and port and parent ref attachment, please take a look at this and see if you can run the tests and just sign off that your implementation passes, and we'll be good to go. The other one is Mattia conformance profiles. This one is going to, because it's not really an API change, it's a little bit different. It has its own graduation criteria. And this one just has, I think this is one of the very last steps in terms of graduation criteria for conformance profiles. This PR just needs some review, and then we should be good on this. This is just actually improving the structure of conformance reports. Yeah, that's it. And Dave, yeah, thank you for asking. So basically, because we have required that every GEP have a soak time of at least 6 months and something like 2 releases, anything that just graduated to experimental in 1.0 is, I don't want to say it's not relevant, but it can't graduate in this cycle. So you can make improvements. Like I think Candace is working on conformance tests for backend TLS policy. That's a huge win if we can get those in, because it will make it that much easier for us to graduate backend TLS policy in the next release when it will have soaked long enough. And same would be true for backend protocol.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
what
good question.
if you look at the project board, there's like a graduated column, but I guess what you're saying, it graduates to experimental from provisional is probably what that means.
Yeah. So this is basically, the last time it moved, and then this is the next transition we're targeting. And looks like I haven't done anything for backend protocol yet. Where is that one? If I missed it, it's on me.
Go down.
I'm
There.
blind.
Move your mouse up one column.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so this one, I think we're targeting 1.20, 1.2 for this. So
Okay,
top
yeah.
of the list. Yep. Cool. And if I think many people should, I think everyone should be able to view this, and I think many people should be able to modify this, but if for any reason you want to be able to modify this and you can't, just ping us on Slack and we can open it up. Yeah. Okay, so that's it for this one. And then there's a few that are targeting experimental, and these really just need more GEP review in every case. I've been really focused on the client cert validation and session persistence, just trying to talk to people that know more about these topics than myself and try and build a stronger opinion myself. I've done initial rounds of review on them, and I'm hoping to have a more detailed review this week. But I think they're both pretty close. And thank you to both of you for, well, everyone here for getting this working. With that said, I want to keep on moving because we're running out of time, and I'm going to skip over. Well, no, I won't completely skip over this. I'll mostly skip over this unless we happen to have time at the end. There's a whole lot of stuff happening around reference grant. This has been termed referential authorization because it's gotten much bigger. I added a link to the CAP there, but basically we're doing another API review session this Thursday morning at 9 a.m. in Pacific time, at least. Convert to your time zone. Anyone's welcome to join, as always. And if you're interested in what we're proposing as the future of reference grant and much more, there's some links here. But with that, I'll hand it back to Dave because there are other things that we should discuss.
First one's more of a question, but maybe I'll do the second one first. Essentially, I noticed a whole bunch of gaps in our conformance testing, so I'm backfilling them. So none of the backend ref, you can have filters there for the HTTP route, have any conformance tests. So you have like mirroring, request, response headers. I've tested request and response headers on implementations that support it. And those tests pass. The thing I had to do here though is I had to, maybe not this one, but like some of these tests are using features that are in core, so in combination, so I had to remove that. So for example, the pre-filter response header was actually using request header filter features, and that doesn't make sense to do in the backend. So I essentially deleted it from the core test because I assume it's covered in a different test. So if those are more familiar with the test, that'd be good to review. Because I'd imagine like for each of these backend tests, you want to opt into it, not like just opt into all backend stuff and then see things fail. So just a heads up there. What I'm kind of doing here so people can see is like I'm reusing the existing test and just changing the YAML. And that kind of like simplifies the logic in terms of essentially the filter would be the same on the pre-backend and the post-backend, and that's kind of asserting that they have the same behavior.
Well, wouldn't you want? It seems like one of the main reasons you would want to have a filter at the backend level is in the case of traffic splitting.
Yeah, but I want to test traffic splitting in every single of these tests.
Yeah, that's fair. I get that. I guess my concern is that there's not there in the current PRs that I haven't looked that closely, but it seems like any implementation could claim support for backend filters, even if they just supported the route level filter, like even if they just apply them as route filters, route rule filters, like they just pick these up and move them up one level, then that would be enough to pass these tests, I think.
Yes, I think I would just want to land like initial things first and then shore up later if it's a concern like that. Because I think I saw something else, or I mentioned something in Slack where we have a similar kind of issue with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. The other high level feedback I would say here is if we could have some kind of generic prefix that covers every backend filter. It's like if HTTP route backend filter X, and so then everything that starts with HTTP route backend filter kind of is clearly grouped together. Because I think
Yeah, I
my
think
guess is that there's going to be a lot of implementations that either support no backend filters or all of them.
I
But
had I had that first and then I changed it to add the suffix.
okay.
I wanted the
Yeah.
test beside each other. So I
Yeah.
can change the test name. Probably the other big thing too is like weights. I added a conformance test for weighted traffic because that
Yeah.
didn't exist in core as well.
Oh,
Uh,
yes, I saw that one. Yes, that's going to be worth discussion. So while we're still here, the one thing just to clarify what I was saying, I agree with test names being beside each other, that makes sense, and maybe the same thing makes sense for feature name, but feature name and test name don't necessarily need to be the same, but maybe they should all just be the same. I don't know. I don't feel that strongly. Cool. Well, thank you. This is a huge set of gaps that would be filled. So I wish we had better machinery for this, but right now it just means that implementations, if you can please run these tests at your leisure, it will help speed up these reviews and get them in. But it seems like a great detail to have these gaps filled in.
And then
Cool.
related is the point above. Essentially, I'm seeing like some implementations do resolve refs false when they don't support a feature, but in my mind, that seems confusing because I equate refs to references versus feature support. So I think accepted false should be the right thing. And I've seen some implementations do either or. So I don't know if that's just a lack of
I think it depends on exactly how the feature is implemented. If the feature is implemented with a reference, then it's valid to say to be like, I don't support that. I can't follow that reference. Resolve if it was false.
that I get, but I think what's happening is people are adding it's because the stanza is on the backend ref, and then because they don't support a feature for the filter for the backend ref, I think they're saying that the resolved ref is bad in contrast
I
to
wonder if we're saying anything that suggests that uh, you should always specify these conditions. I think we might be. And if so, when accepted as false, it's kind of like, I don't know what to set anything else to. So I'm just going to say everything else is false too, where it seems like accepted false may be something that can stand on its own with just the reason it's not accepted instead of having these other conditions alongside. I'm not sure. Uh, but it might be good to provide some examples if you can of the inconsistencies here.
yeah, I can
And
one would be like request mirroring. In some implementations, accepted is true, but then the resolved ref is false, even when it doesn't support it.
oh, that's not great.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, maybe write if you don't mind starting an issue for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess okay, Envoy proxy does that too.
Yeah, it would be worth I would not be surprised if GK does very strange things with status as well. So I like it would be
I'll make
helpful just to, yeah,
Okay.
cool.
That's all I had.
And then in maybe just the last minute or so that we have here, I just wanted to call this out because, like you mentioned, Dave, this is a big deal, something that we historically have avoided testing because, well, weights, like how how do you, it's kind of like this question of how do you know if routing is truly random? Like if you keep on getting sent to the same backend, it could still technically be random. Uh, your starting point is basically that you have 1,000 requests that are sent, and then you expect there to be up to a 5% gap from the desired weight and the resulting weight. Is that a correct interpretation?
I'm glad I wrote good variable names.
Yes. No, I dug through this for a bit, and I thought, oh, it'd be really good if there were variables, and then I came back, oh, there are. And so yes, thank you. That's great. But
What I do, yeah.
yeah, it's really tough to test weights because something could fail despite legitimately giving something like a 70% chance of hitting a backend from V1 and actually sending, say, 80%. But yeah, at what level? I don't know what the correct tolerance percentage is here, because at any number here is going to result in some level of flakes. I don't know. Haven't thought this one through enough, but I think this is worth more discussion and awareness, especially for implementations that are running conformance tests as part of pre-submits or post-submits. This test in particular feels like one that could be introducing flaky failures if we're not awfully careful.
Yeah, this was the test I was referring to where like you could be passing gateway conformance, but you don't support weights properly.
Yeah, yeah, that too. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean,
Um,
I think Rob's point is the reason why this has not been solved up until now is that there's a very good chance that this test, it's very hard to write this test so that it's impossible to write this test so there is no chance of it flaking. And the tricky part is writing it so that there's a small enough chance of it flaking that you can be that you can be confident that it's actually working.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
the top percentage is what needs to be figured out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be really interested, especially if we can get a variety of different data planes represented, like, how repeatable, how likely is this to flake on, say, an Envoy-based implementation versus Nginx-based implementation, HA proxy, etc. Right?
I
Yeah.
mean, it's also gonna depend on how fast you do it and how fast your thing converges as well. If you start sending these things immediately, then it'll take a while. It may take a while for the config to roll out to all of the.
Yeah.
But that is not to say that it's not worth doing. It is 100% worth doing. It's just practically this is going to need to be a reasonably forgiving test. It's better to have some test that validates that the basic functionality kind of works than have it be like super correct, provably correct. So I put some things in the chat about the previous one though. I was thinking about it just then. It is valid for there to be a resolved refs and accepted if there are multiple backend
sorry.
tests. Yeah.
All of you are welcome to stay on. I've got to drop.
Yeah, we've run out of
but
time.
Thank you much for the great conversation, and talk to you later. Have a great one.
Right.